Excellent. Okay, we are recording. Excellent. It has been a long time since we've talked, probably around 30 years, and that was over the phone while you were on the
which is
road.
which is nuts when you consider the fact that we're both 25.
Well, I've got a few years on you yet, but
Oh yeah.
yeah, I'm 68. So
Well, bless you, Ken.
but
Thank you for doing this, man. I don't just mean the interview with me, but thank you for everything that you do to promote the music, man. We all appreciate you.
well, I appreciate that, but much more so, uh, none of us in jazz journalism or radio can do it without artists like you who are interested and not only share your time and talent, but you know, take time to do these chats, because
Right on.
it really helps with the music. One
But
thing I wanted to
what?
tell you real quick, I've got like a 40-minute window with Zoom.
Yep.
I may
Okay.
be out of order, or I might skip some questions I might normally ask in an interview. And
Sure.
again, Hothouse only gives me about 750 words. So
Gotcha.
I may skip over some of the jazz history stuff,
Do
even
your
though
thing, and I'm on board.
okay,
Please.
well,
Yeah.
I know that you can't start without talking about your father's influence on getting you interested in jazz. So I'm going to just let you share your thoughts and memories.
Well, I'd be honored to speak about my father. He's certainly the fundamental reason, along with my mother, for me getting to speak with you today, and for anyone taking any interest in presenting me as a player or being interested in what I have to say about this great Black American art form. My father played the tenor saxophone, and I grew up hearing him at home. His main man was Lester Young. My father was born in 1928. So the relevance that Lester Young had, making his first recordings around 1937 or so, was that he was the hot guy at the time. My father was a young man, and of course, all of us who love Lester Young's music and the music of so many musicians who've come since, who in one way or another have been influenced by him, uh, is immeasurable. But I was hearing my father play the horn around the house before I knew that this music had been named jazz, and it was just a sound I grew up with. And from my early childhood, if not from birth, I was hearing some of the records that my father was listening to. And in particular, there were a couple of albums that were in heavy, almost constant rotation on my father's portable record player in our garage. And one was a recording, a collection rather, of some of the recordings of Charlie Parker that were made for the Dial label in 1947, that you're well aware of, Ken. That featured young Miles Davis and Duke Jordan and Tommy Potter and Max Roach, things like Scrapple from the Apple and Dewey Square. My father was listening to those and also listening to the 1962 Thelonious Monk studio recording on Columbia Records that featured Thelonious Monk's quartet with Charlie Rouse, John Orr, and Frankie Dunlop, called Monk's Dream. My father was playing those two records quite frequently, and he noticed when I was pretty young that I uh, took an interest in these records, and I would come back to the garage while my father was sculpting and listen to the records with him. And one of the things that initially fascinated me about the music, Ken, was seeing how the music affected my father energetically and emotionally. Watching my father smile and kind of move to the music. And I thought it was so magical that the music was going through the air from the record player into my father's ears, and it was affecting him. And I couldn't put any of this into words as a young guy, but it really it made the music quite intriguing to me. I was also somehow able to kind of ascertain what the instrumentation was. I could pick out that the Charlie Parker records had a trumpet. And as you realize, the trumpet on some of those recordings I mentioned with Charlie Parker was muted, the regular mute. And the trumpet and alto saxophone on the Charlie Parker records were playing these melodies, sometimes in unison or in octaves or in harmony or occasionally in contrapuntal motion. And I really dug the effect, the rub between the two instruments, the woodwind instrument and the brass instrument, playing these melodies together. And then when I listened to the Monk records that had the instrumentation of tenor saxophone, piano, bass, and drums, the saxophone and piano were playing the melodies together, but it had another kind of a starkness to it. Compared to kind of some of the textural elements in the Charlie Parker records. And again, I wasn't really able to verbalize this back then, but
Okay, you're just frozen for a second.
Then,
Okay, go ahead. For some reason the audio and image froze.
okay, you with me so far?
Yeah. It's just that, yeah, right in the middle of that sentence, but just go on wherever you feel
Cool.
like.
When I entered the fourth grade, Longfellow Elementary School here in Berkeley, I met a man named Phil Hardiman, who passed some years ago. And Mr. Hardiman would go to all the Berkeley public schools, beginning at the fourth grade level through high school, and teach us about jazz. So this was very significant for me because where I had previously associated this music with older people, my father and the faces on his record collection, here I was seeing my contemporaries getting their feet wet playing a 12-bar blues. And so that kind of, more than kind of, it very much made a connection for me that maybe this was possible for me to try to do. And my father saw that I was interested in the music. He helped me tremendously and continued to throughout his life. One of the first things he told me was about the importance of learning the standards, the standard American popular songs and jazz tunes, and learning as much as I could about the history of the music, the different players and their influences, different bands they played with. And so that was kind of my beginning in the music. I started in the music, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you decided to go to New York, I mean, you had a lot going on. You were studying with Walter Bishop. You ended up playing with so many greats. So just like you to share some of those highlights with me, the things that stand out to you.
Yes. So I was born in New York City and grew up here in Berkeley, California. I moved back to New York when I was 19, which was the spring of 1982, with the specific aspiration of becoming a jazz messenger. I wanted to play with Art Blakey more than anything. And that interest and that passion led the way to many things. Ultimately playing with Art Blakey, but along the way, I met some wonderful mentors like Walter Bishop Jr. and Walter Davis Jr. during my first year in town. And they each helped me so much. The wonderful drummer Billy Hart also took me under his wing. And without getting ahead of myself, I should explain the connection with Billy Hart. While I was coming up here in the Bay Area in my teens and I was beginning to play gigs, I first had a steady gig with a vocalist who's still at it, who's still doing it, named Faye Carroll. And Faye really gave me my introduction to accompanying a singer and taught me a lot about the blues, and also gave me an opportunity to lead the trio for a couple numbers before she'd mount the stage. And then shortly after joining Faye's group, I began playing with the great trumpeter, Dr. Eddie Henderson. So Eddie told me when he knew I was moving to New York, he said, when you get to town, you find out where Billy Hart's playing. You look in the Village Voice and see where Billy Hart's playing. You go to his gig and you tell him that you're a friend of mine, that I told you to say hello. So I did that. I had that calling card through Eddie, and I met Billy, and Billy really took me under his wing, took me around to the various clubs, took me to the Vanguard and such, introduced me to the people who worked on the door. And he said, musicians shouldn't have to pay to get into these clubs. So I want to let them know that you're cool. So he introduced me to the different people that worked on the doors in the club, and he started kind of vouching for me to the musicians, telling me the musicians that I was cool, that I could play, and asking them on my behalf if they would let me sit in. So, Billy really made me feel included. And Walter Bishop Jr., he took it upon himself to call himself my New York father. And he introduced me as such when I'd meet his colleagues, which carried a lot of weight, as you can imagine. And he cared about me so much, never judged me, supported me, and was also very forthright in letting me know about things I needed to work on. He wasn't just coddling me by any means, but he really wanted the best for me. And Walter understood that my dream was to play with Art Blakey. And so a lot of our dialogue entailed things I needed to understand along the way in this aspiration. So Mark Morganelli, who you know, who runs the Jazz Forum, which is now in Tarrytown, founded the Jazz Forum in New York at its original location, which was on Broadway and Bleecker Streets in a loft. And my friend John Donnelly, bassist, who moved to New York with me in '82, he and I would attend the jam session on Tuesday evenings at the Jazz Forum that was led by the drummer Joe Jones Jr. So Joe ultimately hired John and I to be in the rhythm section with him for the house trio for the jam session. And at that jam session, I met many musicians, notably Art Blakey's pianist at the time, the wonderful Johnny O'Neill. Mm-hmm. So Johnny introduced me to Art there at the bar at the Jazz Forum. And Art looked me up and down. I had my blue jeans and plaid flannel work shirt and sneakers on. Art used to have a saying. He would say, see with your ears and hear with your eyes. And Art looked me up and down in our first meeting. He said, how long you been in town? And I said, whatever it was, 6 weeks. And he said, you need more time. He said that for me playing notes. Like he just read me, and I knew he was right. But I would go hear the Messengers as often as I could, and I'd sneak my little Sony Walkman tape recorder into the shows, record the shows, and try to stay abreast of the Messengers repertoire. And Johnny O'Neill also helped me. I used to hang out with Johnny. Johnny would stay at the Washington Square Hotel at the time he was playing with Art, still living in Detroit. And I would hang out with Johnny, and we'd listen to music together. And one afternoon, Johnny and I snuck into the practice rooms at NYU, and Johnny helped me with some of the repertoire that the Messengers were playing that I didn't really have together, like Donald Brown's original composition, New York. And he showed me the piano parts. So a few months later, it was either January or February of '83, the Jazz Messengers played at the Blue Note. And I would always go hear the band as often as I could. And a couple nights into the gig, I guess it was the Thursday evening of the Tuesday through Sunday, Johnny came up to me. He said, Boo said you can sit in tonight. So fortunately, I knew the repertoire. I wasn't very accomplished or developed as a player, Ken, but I did know the book. So sure enough, I got called up on the bandstand with a test piece. Art started a drum introduction. Johnny motioned to me, and I came over, and Johnny just whispered in my ear, "Miss BC." And then he left the piano bench, left me there. So fortunately, I knew this song, which was written by Bobby Watson's wife, Pamela Watson, dedicated to Betty Carter, and it was originally recorded on a Jazz Messengers album called Album of the Year, which was the first studio recording to feature Wynton Marsalis from, I guess, about 1980. And so I knew it. Art played the introduction, and I came in with this bassist, Charles Fambro, and I knew the song, but I wasn't really savvy in conversational, spontaneous accompaniment. So I was sort of trying to play what I'd heard James Williams play on the original record. But of course, the soloist, Terrence.
Okay, we're frozen again right when you said Terrence.
The same song
Let's see if we
record.
can. Okay, let's see if we can get something going again here.
Was the
All right.
last thing you got?
Yeah, the last thing you said was Terrence, I think, leading into what, Blanchard, I
Okay,
guess.
yeah. Terrence Blanchard, Donald Harrison, and John Toussaint. They were playing their own solos. They weren't playing the solos that were on the records with Bobby Watson and Bill Pierce and Wynton. And so I did my best to be appropriate in the moment, and tried to keep up appearances to the audience like I belonged there and I knew what I was doing. So after the set, Art Blakey was sitting at the table, and he actually motioned for me to come over. And I came over, and he said, "Keep doing what you're doing. I'm going to need you one day." And that was all I needed. That was all the inspiration I needed to stay with it. Because as it played out, Ken, it was 5 years until I actually joined the Messengers. And I like to tell young folks about that because I think if someone could take a page out of my book, it's important, if there's something that you want in the music or in life for that matter, you got to really stay with it. You can't just expect instant results in a couple of weeks. And I was determined to play with Art Blakey. And a beautiful gift came my way because a few months thereafter, the great Betty Carter heard me playing with a vocalist in a club in Long Island. And she took my number, and her secretary called me and asked me to come in for an audition. So I went to Betty's home in Fort Greene in Brooklyn. And at the audition, Betty hired me. I ended up playing for 4 wonderful years with Betty. She taught me more than could fill a book. She taught me so much. And the only reason I left Betty was that Art Blakey offered me the job with the Messengers. And I joined Art Blakey in April of 1987.
Yeah, that's tremendous. Let's see. I can't tell if we've frozen again or not.
Uh-oh.
Oh yeah, no, you're there. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I'm hearing the uh-oh and such. I'll tell you what, just to make sure, I don't know how this Zoom works when it hits the 40-minute mark. If I suddenly have to give them a credit card or something, I don't mind doing that. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit.
Sure.
One of the things, you've featured yourself as a composer from time to time. And of course, on one recent Sunnyside album, they were all originals. How does a new song evolve for you from your initial inspiration to the finished piece?
Well, I'd say that my original pieces sort of continue to evolve. There's the initial seed of inspiration. I might hear a phrase or have a certain kind of feeling that I'm wanting to channel that inspires the piece. And once I have the completed form, say I've taken the idea for a vamp or initial few intervals of a melody and developed it into a structure, there's actually playing the song and performing it, and kind of um, staying open-minded as much as possible, and sometimes being constructively critical, and feeling it. For me, playing for an audience uh, is a very instrumental element in development as a player and as a writer. So as I perform a piece, I'll kind of get my own innate sense of how well things are really translating. I wouldn't say I'm such a selfish composer that disregards the audience. I would say that I'm really looking for the unspoken message that is the seed or the germ of my original inspiration to write a piece. I'm looking for that to really effectively hit home with listeners. And more so than anyone telling me, as a performer, just through repetition and practice over the years, you kind of become attuned to feeling the vibe of an audience. And so this affects my sense of tempo with an original piece, um, and the flavor, the harmonies, and my phrasing. And it's kind of an ongoing process. I kind of try to stay open. I'm presently playing some pieces that I wrote and recorded 30 years ago, and still staying open-minded to the tempos. I will say that as I get older, I'm more drawn to medium and slow tempos than I once was. I used to be kind of hot to trot, and I really enjoy playing fast, and I still do. But my ideal is thinking about notes being kind of akin to speaking, and in wanting to engage the listener and to get my sentiment across. Uh, I am less interested in bravura or being impressive, and more interested in just engaging the listener's interest and being intelligible, giving them a storyline that they can follow, if this makes sense.
Oh, no, it makes a lot of sense to me. And I'm glad to hear that you said that you're going back and exploring some of those originals, because some of those originals from back in the Blue Note days stand out to me even today. So, I'm glad to hear that you might, that you're looking to return to some of them. Now, kind of in a related question, over your career, you've consistently had a knack. Now, mind you, I've been collecting jazz for 50 years.
God bless you.
You have a knack for finding the unexplored gems. I was looking over some of your repertoire here, and when you think of Carl Perkins tunes, you don't think of Way Across Town. You know, or actually, I don't know how many people are recording Carl Perkins tunes all that much since he had such a short life. But in other words, when I see one jazz composer after another, yeah, you're playing a jazz standard here and there, but you're also finding the gems that people are overlooking. And some of these musicians have written a huge amount of songs, and they're just waiting to be discovered.
Amen to that.
Yeah. Now, how do you do that? Do you have a music collection, or do you just go online and listen to all kinds of things?
I have a collection, and it's primarily MP3s at this point. But my favorite artists, my favorite pianists and horn players and bands, with these for these musicians, I'm a bit of a completist. I try to get everything I can, by a Cedar Walton or a Hank Mobley or a Hank Jones or a Tommy Flanagan or Red Garland,
Uh-huh.
Wynton Kelly, Sonny Clark, Horace Silver, people like this. And I just listen for what speaks to me. Um, there's, of course, humanity society has gone through many changes uh, uh, since what I kind of consider the golden years of straight ahead jazz, which was maybe like from the 1930s through the late 1960s. For me personally, it's not
Hmm.
something that can be defined. And I personally am not looking to try to prove how modern or innovative I am. That's never been my thing. I've always wanted to be more authentic, if you will, to the spirit of the music that I get from the recordings. Uh, so I listen to these recordings, a lot of records, especially centered around the 1950s, for example. Uh, and I don't consider them old or dated by what years they were recorded in. It's just representative of certain aesthetics in the music. Um, and and a certain kind of hunger that I feel from the music, and I try to go right to that. And so, listening to my favorite artists, I will hear some gems, uh, and coming from this orientation, I can listen to music in the present. And for example, I just tuned into a very recent live stream of the wonderful alto saxophonist Jesse Davis playing from
Hmm.
Smalls. And he played a song that I've heard Tommy Flanagan and others play for years, written by Tom McIntosh, called The Cupbearers.
Hmm.
And yeah, this is something Tommy Flanagan and John Hicks used to play a lot. It's a real New York piece, but I realized I've been neglecting it. And just hearing Jesse Davis play it in the present inspired me to begin learning it. And yeah, there's certain themes that go back. You mentioned Carl Perkins. Besides his Waycross Town, I'm very fond of a piece that Harold Land recorded on what I guess was Carl Perkins' last record, a Harold Land record called Harold in the Land of Jazz. It's a beautiful minor key thing called Groove Yard. Uh, and yeah, I can listen to the cows come home to records from the 1950s and 60s, and it's really not a finite palette to me. It's a very expansive one, and I just feel that every artist, each artist, has the right to go for what they're most interested in. Uh, if I'm not overstating this, I hear a lot of things today that are called jazz that don't really have the essential element um, of swing and the blues to them, and wonderful music. But this hearing all the eclecticism these days that gets called jazz actually only fortifies my lifelong inspiration to strive for more authenticity.
Hmm. Okay. Uh, One of the things related, since your gig at the Jazz Forum is a 2 nights of solo piano, do you put together do you approach solo piano differently than you would like if you were bringing a trio? I mean, do you have a certain group of songs that you have maybe that you might play, or are you totally spontaneous? What do you prefer to do?
I have a core repertoire that I'm looking to expand. Um, I think if I can expand my solo piano repertoire to a good 60 plus songs from around 45 or 50 as it is right now, I'd be comfortable for the most part striving to go deeper with that existing repertoire into interpretation, things you were speaking of earlier, finding just the right tempo and phrasing and things like that. More so than just trying to get more and more numbers in my book, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
However, I know that among other things, I am a composer, and Art Blakey was very outspoken about calling some of the jazz messengers uh, lazy, about not applying themselves more to writing when you have the ability to write at all. And I do have the ability to compose. Um, so I would like to do more writing in the future, but not to prove a point, if that makes any sense. I wait for the inspiration to really hit. And meanwhile, I've noticed that I'm playing a lot of songs that are actually written by jazz pianists. The new album that I've recorded is being released on the Sunnyside label in May, of solo piano. For this album, the entire program is composed by pianists, including myself. So with some of my favorite pianists, I'd like to explore more of their canon. But I certainly don't need for my repertoire to be composed exclusively by pianists, but it's an opportunity for me to kind of pay homage in my own way to some of my inspirations.
Mm-hmm. What is that CD going to be titled?
It's simply titled Solo. What do I want to say? Pat Benatar was already taken.
Well, I wanted to give a plug in the article, so I wanted to make
Thank
sure
you,
to
sir. I
get
appreciate that.
yeah, I wanted to make sure to get the title correct.
No,
So
thank you. It's called Solo, and it's being released on the Sunnyside label May 11th. Very
okay.
grateful to Francois Zalacan at Sunnyside for his wonderful support to me.
Oh, that's great. Oh boy. Well, do you also, is there currently a working band that you're regularly working with?
Ken, I've really been focusing on solo piano. I played a trio for decades, literally for decades. Um, Touring internationally since around 1990. And during the quarantine of the pandemic, I embraced the opportunity and this situation of being alone, because I've enjoyed playing solo sporadically over the years and wanted to do more. And I've just gone head first, full force with playing solo, and it's both liberating and challenging, but I like the fact that there's no one to blame but myself.
And there's nobody to hide a clinker.
No, it's very
to
true.
cover up.
That's very true. And that's inspiring me to choose my notes more carefully. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but the thing is, didn't I think Art on one of his records said, if you're making a mistake, play it loud. I forget which
That's right.
CD that's on, but I remember hearing that remark. I think it was right at the beginning.
Art used to tell us, if I don't hear you playing any mistakes, I'm going to feel like you're not really trying.
Oh gosh. Well, I've got about 4 minutes left. Can you take a moment to talk about your friendship with Oscar and how you really got to enjoy working with him?
Yes, sir. I'd be honored to. So I met the great Oscar Peterson through my mentor, teacher, and band leader, the late great Ray Brown. As you know, Ray and Oscar were lifelong friends and indeed musical brothers since the late 1940s. And Ray introduced me to Oscar at a now defunct club in Toronto called the Bermuda Onion, while we were performing there with Ray's trio that included me and Jeff Hamilton. And Oscar was most encouraging from the first moment he heard me. He actually said, "It's a pleasure to hear the piano played the way I like to hear it played." And that began our friendship. Back then, emailing was kind of a new thing. So the way I would correspond with Oscar would be to actually write handwritten letters. And that challenged me to find substantial things to say to him and ask him beyond just saying, what was it like playing for Ella and Louie? But really more personal things, telling about what was going on in my life and asking him artistic questions. And our friendship kind of developed from there. Oscar had me to his home numerous times and sat at the piano with me. And more than just the notes, he gave me a very privileged opportunity to witness his humility to his elders and musical predecessors. And Oscar was unashamed to cry tears speaking of his mentors in the music. And as great as Oscar is, he was eternally humble to them, to the people who had he certainly knew who he was. And it was also important for me just to witness the balance between Oscar's humility and dignity, self-awareness. That's continued to inspire me. I could go on and on about things Oscar showed me. But yeah, that's what really stands out to me was his love of the music, the depth of his heart, and his respect for the people who came before him.
Well, Benny, I want to thank you so much for your time. If I could follow up and do a second Zoom thing, if it'll let me, I may try it again and send you a link if you've got a few more minutes. But I know it's going to cut me off in a few seconds.
Understood.
But in case I can't do that, I want to thank you again for your time, for your great music, and I'll follow it up with an email in just a second. Okay.
That's wonderful, Ken. Thank you so much, sir.
All right. Thank you,
Appreciate
sir.
you.
All righty.
So long.
So long.